Here.
Sean,
Here.
Carla,
Here.
Chuck is here, and Erin Gaffin is having some technical difficulties, but I'm sure she'll be here shortly. From the staff, we have Dr. Doherty, Assistant Superintendent Kelly, Student Services, Dr. Stiles, and CFO Gail Dowd. And of course, most important person, Linda Engelson is here. Tonight, the superintendent sent out earlier a memo to the community that we would not be discussing the fall school opening tonight. We'll reconvene that discussion next week. There's been some changes in the plans that the staff just needs more time to go through that. In a moment, I'll have him. I'll have the superintendent read that email again, or that note that went out again. So not doing the fall reopening plan. We'll start with any committee reports, and then we will have some policy first reading and discussions surrounding guidance given to us from the Massachusetts Association of School Committees pertaining to COVID-19 guidelines. Following those discussions, we will enter into executive session, and we will not return to discuss collective bargaining agreements, and we will not return to open session following that. So having said that, Dr. Doherty, do you just want to read that statement again about the fall opening, just in case people didn't get the email?
Sure.
Thank you.
We did send that out about 6:30.
Yep.
We also put it on the social media, so it should be out there by now. Good evening, Reading Public School community. Throughout this pandemic, our focus in returning back to school has always been the health and safety of our staff and students while providing the best learning environment possible given our current situation. As described in our fall reopening plan, version 2, measures that we are taking include satellite rooms to allow for 6-foot physical distancing, proper wearing of face covering, practicing proper hand hygiene, having parents self-check children at home for symptoms, ventilation filter enhancements in our buildings, and increased and enhanced cleaning and disinfecting. Our learning environment includes additional remote learning tools, learning platforms, adequate laptop supplies for our students, and high-end cameras for improving learning in our satellite classrooms. For our plan to be successful, we need to make sure all of the above components are in place and operating effectively before we can safely implement the hybrid model. Unfortunately, due to the impact of COVID-19 on all areas, we have experienced several logistical and staffing challenges that have delayed the implementation of the plan. Our challenges include filling staff vacancies due to an increased volume of leaves, of absences, and accommodations for our staff who are unable to work in person, delayed delivery of technology devices, the challenge of scheduling and retrofitting classrooms with the appropriate amount of furniture and technology infrastructure, and effectively implementing our learning platforms. Due to the above challenges, we are going to need to change our phase-in hybrid plan to reflect a later in-person start date for most groups of students. This delay will allow us to hire and train staff for the vacant positions, receive and appropriately set up the technology and learning platforms, and set up the classrooms for an effective hybrid model of learning. We will still provide in-person instruction for our high needs, RISE preschool, and kindergarten students beginning on September 15th. All other students will start the school year in a remote model. At the August 27th school committee meeting, we will provide a revised phase-in plan, which will reflect the above changes. At the school committee meeting this evening, the committee will defer public comment on this topic until the next meeting. We apologize for the timing of this notice, and we realize the frustration that this will cause families in trying to secure additional child care. However, we felt it was important that you receive this information as soon as possible. We appreciate your patience as we revise our plan. We are looking at all options to address the concerns. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me, and I left an email address there.
Thank you, John. And as Dr. Doherty mentioned, we will certainly take public comment on that, and that will be addressed at the next meeting when that is on the agenda. The other thing I forgot to mention with regard to public comment, if there is any regarding the other discussion, which is the policies, we can address those. The other thing I just wanted to, I didn't realize I didn't mention was consent agenda was on the is on the agenda, and the reason why we are not doing that tonight is not all of the material made it to the packet, so we will take that up as well on the 27th. So having said that, I don't believe there's any staff reports, so I'll go right to committee reports if anybody has one. John Parks, do you?
We did have an ad hoc committee meeting this past week. Things are moving forward. They are going to be setting a date to present to the Library Board of Trustees in September.
Great. Thank you. Oh, hey, Aaron. Glad you made it. Do you have any reports?
I don't know.
Sean?
Nothing beyond what John had to say.
Carla?
No report, Chuck.
And Tom?
No report, Chuck.
And neither do I. So at this time, we will move to the first reading of policy EBCA. So the way this will go is we'll have the reading, then have any discussion, and then we'll vote on the first reading at that point. The next meeting, we will again evaluate any changes that were decided from tonight's discussion and vote the policy in place at that time. So if I can have a reading of the policy.
Sure, I'll get it started. Do you want me to start with the motion first, Chuck, or just go right to the reading?
You can start, I'm sorry, yes, the motion first.
Okay. So the motion is move to accept the first reading of policy EBCFA, face coverings.
Second.
Okay, now if you can read it.
Sure. File EBCFA, Reading Public Schools, face coverings. The Reading Public Schools District is committed to providing a safe environment as schools reopen during COVID-19 pandemic. According to public health experts, one of the best ways to stop the spread of coronavirus and to keep members of our school community safe is the use of face masks or face coverings. Therefore, in accordance with the guidance from the Center for Disease Control, CDC, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, DPH, the following requirements are in place until further notice.
Chuck, can I move to waive the reading?
Yeah, I was just
Okay.
sending that. Yes, thank you.
Well, I
Okay.
like reading. I appreciate that, John.
Well, once you got started, you were on such a roll, I didn't want to interrupt, so I had to wait for you to take a breath.
Okay, so Dr. Doherty, did you have any comments on it before we discuss?
So the two policies that you have tonight are recommended to be voted on by MASC. I did send these to Attorney Joyce. Attorney Joyce came back with some minor revisions on both of them. So what you see here are the edited versions of them. The first one, the face coverings, just explains in detail the rationale, the policy behind it. who is exempt, what the policy is going to be in each school. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Yep. Okay, Sean?
So I have, I'll call it 4 sort of substantive things and then a couple of grammar and nitpick kind of things. So the first substantive one, I wonder if we should be a little bit specific around what we're going to accept as a mask or face covering. There's some recent research around things like the polyester performance material gaiters are actually worse than not having a mask at all. So there might be some specific types of coverings we don't want to include in this policy. And I've got some language which I can propose there, but I'll pause with that thought and then we can go from there.
That's actually in the version 2.0 plan, all of that information.
Okay, so we don't need to specify it in the policy to be able to apply it?
No.
Okay. The second thing was in the third paragraph that begins with for students who are unable to wear a mask, face covering, we put the responsibility on the principal to work with the parent on potential exemptions or other accommodations. I wonder if, I'm all about kind of giving principals control of their buildings wherever we can, but I'm wondering if this is a place where we want to sort of think about, do we need to involve the director of nursing to have some consistency in how we address exemptions or other accommodations to this policy? I think it would be problematic if we have, a certain type of mask allowed under certain circumstances in one school and not in another, for instance.
Sure, we can certainly add that. I mean, the principal would be working closely with the school nurse in that building, who would also be in contact with the director of nurses. But there's very rare occasions when medical needs supersede the wearing of a mask. They're very rare, but we can certainly do that.
So Sean, would you suggest something like where it says your child's principal in consultation with the building nurse?
Yeah, something along the lines of, and I think it would go after the clause if appropriate. Building principals will collaborate with RPS nursing staff in determining accommodations and exemptions or something along those lines.
Okay.
Should I don't know. I don't want to go through a laundry list here. I have 2 more substantive ones, or we can move on to the next person and I'll come back.
That's fine.
Just
Okay.
real quick, Sean, real quick,
Yep.
sorry. Chuck, do you want to go through these as motions so that we accept them as changes as a group, or do we want to just put them out there?
No, what we'll do is we will vote on a revised version at the next meeting. So these changes will be in a revised document prepared by the superintendent, and then we can, vote on them then or strike them then. But that's generally how we've done it. I mean, is that correct, John? Or
Yeah.
Okay, I guess from a logistical perspective, I don't disagree with what Sean just asked, but there might be some things that I ask or the next one that Sean asked that fundamentally we don't agree to, and it might lead to an edit that needs to be removed. And I guess that's where I'm trying to go, is trying to streamline it. But if that's the process and we're comfortable with it, that's fine.
Well, Chuck, I don't think that process precludes somebody from chiming in and having a different opinion about something I raised, right? So
no, not at all.
Tom, yeah, I mean, we can discuss it in real time, or we can come back to it, after I go through my list, like however, I'm fine either way. I won't take offense if you want to chime in on either of those 2 things.
That's what I'd prefer if you would. Yeah, that's the kind of the way I'd like to do it.
So then I'll chime in on those first 2 things, Sean, and then you can jump and finish the rest of the 2.
Sure.
The first one, I agree conceptually, and I wonder if we need to actually refer to a regulation for it to be official. The documentation in terms of the opening and filing, and Dr. Doherty, obviously you have to file that with DSE and all that stuff, but I think for it to be binding to a degree, we need a regulation that they're going to. So in terms of what is an acceptable face covering. So in many other cases, we have regulations that implement the policy, and maybe that's where we could say refer to the regulations or something like that. And that might be just a, you know, a 2-sentence regulation that says these are the, you know, or a 5-bullet regulation that says these are the approved face coverings. But I think in order for it to be binding, we need to think of it from a regulation perspective. And the second thing is, I agree wholeheartedly with consultation with nursing and creating a standard across the district. We only get ourselves in trouble when we go school by school and, hey, this is acceptable over here, this is not acceptable over there. And I think we want to make sure we're as consistent across the district as possible.
Okay. Did you have something on the other thing, Tom?
Those are the two things.
Okay,
The
so
second
far,
one was the
yeah.
nursing one. That's the one I agreed with. And the first one was the face coverings and asking that we refer to a regulation or something else, or however the language is that we normally say this will be implemented via regulation. In this case, it would be, you know, EBCFA-R or something like that.
So, Tom, just Chuck, if I may.
Sure.
So just so you know, that I am not aware of a regulation about the type of face coverings. This came from research studies that have been out there. DESE has not come out with any guidance on this, but what they're referring to is the quality of the fabric of the mask, that the type of the gaiters and the bandanas and the hand knit masks are not appropriate. So that's why I put those in the plan, but there is no regulation that refers to that at this point. There may be down the road, but I haven't seen any yet.
I guess where I was going, and maybe regulation isn't the right word, Dr. Doherty, so correct me where necessary, please. But I know we have, for example, the bullying policy or a few other places where we have the -R that goes with it. And I thought that was, that R stood for regulation, where it's the actual implementation by the administrative team of how the policy is implemented. So it would be the fall reopening plan. Okay, so that's what you're gonna.
Yeah. In the fall reopening plan, I do have the research study from Duke University. I'll link to it, you know, so I break it down as best I can. But DESE hasn't come out, or no one has come out with any regulation. I think it's more the types of masks that we're allowing versus what regulation is out there.
Okay, I'll do a little bit more research to make sure I'm clear on myself, because I'm not sure I am. So I apologize. Go ahead and Sean, to the next one, unless somebody else has other things.
Go ahead, Carla.
Yeah.
What?
Go ahead, Chuck.
All right, go ahead. Yeah.
I see where you're going with it, Tom. I think we want to be able to tie it back to something so people can reference it, right? And whether it's the plan, the reopening plan, I think that's fine too, as long as that document's available for everyone. I think with the comment about the principals, I almost don't see the necessity to bring the nurses into that. But maybe I'm not looking at that properly. I just feel like the principal, it's more of getting the child to be able to be comfortable wearing the mask. And if we're already stipulating what kind of masks that are available, that, I don't know. I think the principal, the nurses fall under the principal's purview in some respects, being in the building. So they would, I don't think it's necessary to say it. Just my opinion.
Okay. Sean, did you have other things, or?
Yeah, just two more. So one is in the middle of the page where it says additionally face masks may not be required when, and then there's 4 sub-bullets. During physical education classes, I assume is inclusive of physical education classes that would happen indoors when we're using the gym. And I just want to sort of make sure that we're thinking about this the same way or that this is represented somewhere, but I went and looked at the state guidelines for, fitness centers and gyms that adults would use. And, I understand the rationale when kids are exerting themselves, it's more difficult to wear a mask and it could, exacerbate breathing problems, things like that. So I understand the rationale, but in phase 3 for the state, indoors, under any sort of exertion, it actually requires 14 feet of distancing when you're not wearing a mask. And it feels like we should probably meet a similar standard if we're going to allow students not to wear masks indoors during PE. I know that might be, nigh impossible, but I can't really wrap my head around justifying something significantly more lax than what we require of adults in a gym.
So Chuck, may I?
Yes.
So we follow the DESE guidelines for physical education, so we can refer to that if you'd like.
Is it? And I mean, we've read 7,000 pages of stuff at this point, and I just don't remember specifically. Do you recall whether it's consistent with that state guideline of 14-ish? I think it was 14 feet for folks not wearing a mask indoors under exertion.
I don't think they're allowing any physical activity indoors. The only type of activity they're allowing indoors is things that are more passive, like yoga, things like that, in the DESE guidelines.
Okay.
It's only for outdoors. That I can certainly refer to it in the policy.
Okay.
But we have specific guidelines for physical education.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. And then the last one, and I noted that this is incremental to what's in the mask model policy. I'm as pro-mask as anybody, and I get frustrated by folks who are resistant to wearing masks in public places and that kind of thing. But I'm pretty uncomfortable with some of the language in the if a family or a student refuses to supply a mask paragraph. A referral to DCF feels like potentially an overreach to me for something that, I wish it hadn't become the case, but it has become somewhat of a political statement or somewhat of a political issue. I think our policies around, I think it's probably sufficient for us to say that a student will be removed from the building if they're sort of refusing to wear a mask, whether that's guided by their family or not. And we already have policies and laws in place around absenteeism and a family's responsibility for their kid being in school. And if they're not in school because they are refusing to have their child wear a mask to comply with our requirements, then they're going to, accrue absences, and there are already procedures in place to deal with that. So, and I not to suggest that we would use this ability liberally, but I get uncomfortable with the idea that we would make a referral to DCF because a family has a perspective that I may very strongly disagree with. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Curious what others think.
Chuck, do you want me to respond?
Sure.
Yeah, that actually came from Attorney Joyce. One of the questions that we continue to hear about is what happens if a child continues to refuse to wear a mask. So we have, there'll be a bunch of different restorative options that are going to be available, but at some point there's going to need to be some sort of action that we're going to have to take. So that actually came right from Attorney Joyce, that piece.
So
it wasn't originally in the MASC.
I don't believe it was. No,
it's not. No.
Tom?
Sean hit on one of the topics that I had as well. This one was one I was extremely uncomfortable with as well, and I knew exactly where it came from, and I understand it, but I can't support that sort of what I view as sort of a draconian measure being taken in a case like this. The language that's in the sample policy from MASC is very simple, very straightforward. If students are in violation of this policy, the building principal will consult with the parent guardians to determine whether an exception is appropriate, or the student may be removed from the school building for in-person learning until such time as they can comply with the requirement or the requirement is lifted. In my mind, there's no reason to be reporting these things to DCF. there's other things in the base policy here as well that, you know, we should probably go back and look at, because I think we took out too many things personally. But in this one, I'm 100% on board with Sean that this is an overreach. I don't think this is something we should be threatening our families with, our parents with, our kids with. DCF ties them up in legal battles left, right, and center. We don't need to do that. We're supposed to be welcoming, not you know, penalizing. And yes, there's the health here that we have to worry about, but the base policy is very clear. They would just go to remote learning if they're not willing to do it. That's the ramification, and that's what the building principal with the parent can work on. I don't see any need for DCF.
Thank you. And does anyone else have any comment on that? Aaron?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the language comes across as very threatening. And I would much prefer language that indicates if a child is struggling, then we will work with that child, we will work with that family. Because it doesn't even give an out. Like it almost makes it sound like that first week, if a child is struggling to keep their mask on, then we're going to call DCF on them. So I would prefer language that is more indicative of what is probably going to happen, which is that we will work with the child, we will work with the family. Something more inclusive and supportive.
Sean?
Can I ask, Dr. Doherty, did Attorney Joyce give any, you know, rationale for why that would be necessary above and beyond what's in the model policy?
He indicated that it's legally, it's very difficult to do much more than that. And I know that he's been working with other legal counsels and other firms about this, and they all are starting to move in this direction. Whether or not you have it in the policy, we still are mandated reporters, and if we reach a point where it's not working out, we would have to file. So whether it's in the policy or not, we may have to do this anyway.
Yeah, I suppose, I guess I would just, the language, and you know, Aaron alluded to this, understand mandated reporting and all that, but this feels faster to that point than other sort of policy violations or other, you know, concerns that might ultimately trigger or absenteeism concerns, right? Because that's you know, that to me is how I would sort of think about this is, you know, if your kid comes to school and they refuse to wear a mask, you know, and they don't have an appropriate medical exemption or what have you, we send them home and they get an absence, and you know, absences accrue, and we've got, you know, again, we already have procedures in place for what happens when absences are accruing, and those things can result in DCF referrals. This feels, you know, I totally agree with Aaron. Like the language itself feels really feels like an overreach.
John?
Yeah, so we actually can't send them home because that would be deemed a suspension. When you deny them, when you deny them sending it, I mean, the guidelines are pretty clear on this too from DESE. We can't just send someone home. It would be construed as a suspension.
So I think, actually, John, I'm sorry, Sean, did you have something on that?
No, go ahead, Chuck.
John, you had John Parks?
Yeah, I do agree with the group on this. I think that language is not something I saw in the original mask release, and I don't think I like it here. They did have information there about the student being moved to a remote model on multiple offenses. I think that would have to be a set number of offenses, and I would feel a lot more comfortable with that.
So by putting it in the policy, we're saying you have to report to
No.
DCF by not putting it in the policy, you may have to use your words. So maybe that's a little softer. If we take it out of the policy, it doesn't mean it might not end up at DCF, but
Right. No, what I'm hearing from the committee is that you prefer the language that was in the MASC policy for this section. So we can certainly reinsert that back in. That's fine.
yeah, correct.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I don't know if it makes sense if Attorney Joyce could join us or send something by email or what have you to provide a little bit more context. I mean, I'm open to reconsidering, but I had a really strong reaction to this, and I'm not generally on the side of the political spectrum that has strong reactions to things like this. So I'll just say that.
Sure. I just, you know, I would be, I don't think sending a kid home is a good idea, particularly if we have a student that's on an IEP, and then we have a whole nother set of issues, because it is construed as a suspension.
Well, I mean, even this language still leaves open the possibility a kid would be sent home, right? It says may be removed from the school building. I think we're just saying, let's leave the language at that, right? You know,
Yeah.
which is what the model policy said.
Can I ask a question?
Tom, hold on, Tom, did you have something?
I was going to move on to the next topic, so if Aaron wants to talk on this
Aaron,
topic.
yes, please, Aaron.
I'm just wondering, John, I assume this has already been talked about? You know, how are the principals thinking that they would handle it? Are they thinking that they would isolate the child in some way? The child wouldn't be able to go back to class? Like, has this been talked through at all, or we're the first ones addressing this?
There'd be a series of restorative steps that we would go through first. I mean, obviously you want to just work one-on-one first with the student and find out what's the rationale behind why they're not wearing the mask. And if that may be all you need, you know? And then if the pattern continues, then you continue to, you know, move forward. You may involve the school psychologist at some point. You know, you may obviously going to involve the parents at some point. So you try to work through a series of steps before you get to this point.
So that makes perfect sense to me, but that's not what's written here. Like that, I don't feel that that is reflected in the language here.
Right, but this isn't talking about the student per se. This is talking about the family not providing the mask, or the family encouraging the student not to wear a mask. This isn't about the student. This is about the family.
But it
Which is
says
why-
if a family or a student.
Right, but the focus on with the DCF piece, it would be the family, not the student.
All right, I still think we need more clarification then. That wasn't
Yeah,
clear to me,
no,
just
I hear-
because it
I-
says family or student. So I thought they were saying either one could be non-compliant.
I heard what the committee, so we'll put in the old language, or
Thank you.
the formal language.
Thank you, Aaron. Tom?
Okay, my turn to have a few that I wanted to think about here. And I'm also referring back to the base mask policy that was out there as well as I go through it. The first one is in the second paragraph. It says face shields will not be permitted unless it's provided under an exception set forth below. But then there's no exceptions set forth below. So the base mask policy has some exceptions about other things, not necessarily about face shields. In particular, it includes, you know, individuals may be excused from the requirement for the following list of reasons per CDC guidance. You know, trouble breathing, is unconscious, incapacitated, cannot remove the mask or face covering without assistance. And those items are explicitly removed from our version. So I guess this is really two things. One is, can we talk about why we removed the excused exceptions from the base one? And two, what would be the exceptions for face shields that are not listed in the policy now that we need to make sure we get added?
So the reason why Michael suggested removing those was because the next paragraph covers it. And that's the medical exemptions. So you don't need to list them, because if you have a medical condition, a disability impact, or other health or safety factors, that's where the exception is. By listing them, it limits you to those areas. That's why he removed it.
So I hear that, but it doesn't align from a textual perspective with the way it's written. When I see that language as it's written is with the exemptions written below, the next paragraph is medical, but it actually doesn't bring in any medical at all. It's just a parent having a question going out to their principal, right? It says due to medical conditions, but there's the base one actually brings in a doctor's note as well, and this one does not. So I'm curious about, again, the language that we tried to do here. I think personally exceptions I don't think it's well written from an exception perspective about what that is. And I think I would prefer to have more of a doctor's conversation here, a doctor's note conversation as the base policy has, as opposed to just a parent saying, I'm exempt from this and here's my reason. I think parents, we're asking them to do a lot of things right now, but having a doctor's note, I think, as is written in the base, is a little bit clearer to me about what's acceptable. I'm curious why we felt the need to take out that portion of the MASC policy as well. In particular, it says, in addition, masks or face coverings will not be required for anyone who has a medical, behavior, or other challenge making it unsafe to wear a face mask or face covering. We have that. We don't have the next sentence, which is a written note from a physician is required for requested exemption. Instead, we add the whole principle back and forth conversation in there, giving us some leeway to reject something that might be a valid physical reason that a doctor would otherwise be approving. And I'm curious about why we think we should insert ourselves into what is potentially a medical conversation.
Sean?
So Tom, I'm not sure that this precludes the situation where we would require a doctor's note. The reason that because I did look at sort of the differences as you did, the reason that I was comfortable with this was the scenario that I was imagining was, what if we know about a particular child due to their IEP, right? That, maybe a child has severe sensory issues, for instance. We know that there's sort of a legitimate justification for them not to be required to wear a mask. We may not also need to put the parent through the process of going and getting a doctor's note in that instance. So, I don't read this as precluding that part of that conversation between the principal and the principal, the nurse, the parent would require a doctor's note, but it does leave open the possibility of other scenarios where that's not required.
I'd be amenable to taking something like that and saying a doctor's note or something already acknowledged by the district, like an IEP or something like that. I just think we're putting too much variability into it, or I guess the word is subjectivity to a degree, where, again, going back to our district consistency, one principal may see X, another principal may say the same thing and say Y, not because anything's doing something wrong, but just because they're interpreting the situation differently. And for me, a doctor's note or a previously agreed upon IEP that makes it clear, or something also along those lines, or 504, would be an appropriate way to say, here's the way in which we can address these things. In a little bit more, clear-cut fashion, I guess, is what I'm going for.
Would you have somewhere to suggest to put that? My suggestion would be, and this somewhat goes against the nurse conversation before, so we have to figure out how to reconcile this to a degree, would be to take out that contact your principal immediately or adjust it sentence in the third paragraph
and go back to the mask documentation of medical note required with Sean's suggestion of or previously agreed or documented reason, i.e. an IEP or 504. Something else along those lines. And I think that's going to need some wordsmithing because not every IEP requires it, not every 504 requires it. So maybe Dr. Stice or somebody who's more in line with, the exceptions that come into those cases might want to provide some feedback. I'm sure Michael could provide, Mr. Joyce could provide some feedback there as well that aligns to something along those lines. But I see Sean's point. It's a very valid point. You don't want to have to go through unnecessary medical meetings or anything else just to get a note if you already have a well understood condition.
John?
Yeah, so I actually agree with Tom on this. As far as you could actually add, right after medical condition, you can do something like noted by a doctor or documentation from the district per IEP or 504. And that way it's not changing the whole body, but it's adding it after medical condition.
Yeah.
And just quickly adds a blurb to it. And that way
so add due to medical conditions as noted in a doctor note, comma, IEP requirements, comma, 504 requirements, comma, then disability, and then the other stuff that's in there. Is that what you're saying, John?
Yes.
Something along those lines?
Yeah, I would leave it a little simpler than that, though. Just as medical condition as noted by doctor or documented reason from the district, i.e. For 504 or IEP reasons.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to go quite that lengthy in word just to hone it down. Is that agreeable, Tom?
I'm agreeable to that concept. I mean, I think that I didn't want to put all this burden on principals to make a decision if a decision is already well understood.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to remove the medical case that is well documented already as well.
Okay, Aaron?
Going back to the face shields, at the end of paragraph 2, it says face shields will not be permitted unless it is provided under an exception set forth below. So that's language saying here's circumstances where a face shield will be allowed, but then we don't go on to list reasons why they could wear a face shield instead of a face mask. Am I reading that correctly?
That was my read as
Yeah,
well.
that was the
Okay.
point from in the other paragraphs that talked about it.
But I mean, to add to that, Aaron, I think, as I was reading it, maybe that even just changing, and this is where it would be great to have somebody who's really an English wordsmith, but provided under the exception set forth below, and the exception is the next paragraph. Instead of and, where and assumes there's multiple listed, but I'm just trying to figure out how that's, or I think what they're trying to go for is there must be a medical exception that requires you to wear a shield instead of a mask. And somehow that language needs to tie back to the previous paragraph. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we just don't put it in the proactive anywhere. Like these, we say this is when you are exempt from a mask, but we don't say this is when you can wear a shield instead of a mask, or you need a shield instead of a mask. So we don't go into that at all. So we probably need to add a sentence to that third paragraph.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're wearing face shields, but
Does the word face covering include face shields?
No, they're two different things.
yeah, I didn't take it to mean that.
And with the face shields, you still need a face mask.
Okay. Yeah.
The face shields do not protect you from the aerosols.
So it would be someone wearing both.
They'd have to wear both.
They'd be wearing it in addition to.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
then even that makes that sentence even more weird, right? That sentence, I think, probably needs to be really looked at and figure out if it's appropriate at all. Then, if that's the case.
John, is it the intent for that sentence to preclude individuals, students, staff, others from wearing a face shield in addition to a mask? Because I think it has the effect of doing that.
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that.
I assume that's not the intent.
No, it's not the intent, but
Okay.
Yeah, that's where Aaron was going. Yep, I agree with that concern.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should say, it should be more worded like face mask accompanied by a face shield. Something along those lines.
And it has to go to the positive case or something that Aaron's talking about, right? When are they allowed as opposed to when are they, or is it trying to say you can't just wear only face shields, right? To Dr. Doherty's point. So somehow, some way, we just need to figure out that language and what the intent of what it's trying to say is. I had one more pedantic one, Chuck.
Sure.
The file number is EBCFA, which would be good if we had an EBCF, but we don't. We have an EBC and an EBCD, but we don't have an EBCF. And in fairness to our policy writers, the reference manual doesn't have an EBCF either. I think they took this from another district that did have an EBCF. And so I'm wondering if this is the right lettering, considering we don't have the hierarchy in place appropriately, which I learned the hard way with the social media policy stuff.
I can check with MAS. This came from MASC, that EBCA, so I can check.
Yeah. So Tom, are you suggesting we add it as EBCF and not EBCFA?
That's one option, or we find the original EBCF as well. And this is going to be the same thing for the next one, by the way, just a hint going forward. We have the same problem, but at least that one has in the reference manual an appropriate parent. This one does not. So somewhere this came from, and we can reach out to MASC and find out which district created this in the first place that made it become the model, because that district probably has EBCF. And I'm guessing this fits under that somehow.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Aaron, sorry.
So two things. I looked up the physical education guidelines. Sean, you were asking about them. So it's with a mask, students can be outside or inside 6 feet apart, but without a mask, they can't do physical education indoors at all. And then the other point is I guess it would be paragraph 5. It starts with a student's mask or face covering. It's just a really minor grammatical. It says, however, the district will supply, I think it should be a disposable face covering. And it just says supply disposable.
Right, I agree with that one. So on the PE thing, recognizing that this model policy may have been written, before, during, after the DESI PE guidelines came out, should we just eliminate that third sub-bullet?
Or
third
just
bullet?
Add the word outside to it.
Well, they can be 10 feet apart and not wear masks outside. So it is an option available to PE teachers.
Right, but we already have a while outside bullet, so that's covered there. Just to eliminate any confusion about whether PE inside is going to include, exertion type activities and people taking their masks off, do we just eliminate that third bullet?
I see what you're saying.
John Parks is shaking his head.
I'm thinking during outdoor physical education classes.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. It's just redundant with the fourth one, which already clarifies that outdoor stuff is okay.
I agree. I just think it clarifies it for a specific class.
Sure.
So it
Sure.
should say, during physical education classes that are outdoors.
Or just put outdoor before, physical education classes for pithiness.
Yep.
As long as that doesn't cause confusion, because if the PE teacher wants them 6 feet apart, they still have to wear masks, even if they're outdoors. So as long as people aren't under the assumption that PE going
Right.
outdoors automatically allows masks to come off, because it doesn't.
So you could say during outdoor physical education classes with 10 foot of social distancing. Make it even clearer. And you can add a reference at the end to the DESE physical education band, etc. Reference material.
That might make more sense. Yeah.
Anyone else? You get all that, John, Linda?
I got it.
Okay, so we'll now have a roll call vote on the first reading, and as mentioned at the outset, we will review the second reading. That we review will encompass these changes that we discussed tonight. So, John Park,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Carla,
Aye.
and Sean,
Aye.
and Chuck, aye. Thank you. Okay. John, did you want to give some quick color on the second
Sure.
policy?
So the purpose of this policy is to provide a broad overview of when remote learning would be appropriate. It's not meant to drill down and be into the specifics of what each detail of it is, but this is obviously another policy that's been created because of the changing situations. So, and we did use the MASC guidance policy. I did give this to Michael. I don't believe there was a lot of changes on this one from him compared to the last one.
Okay, so first we'll have a motion.
The motion is move to accept the first reading of the first of policy IHBHE, remote learning.
Second.
Seconded. I don't know who, that was a tie. I don't know who got that in there first.
I got the last one. You can give that one to Carla.
Okay.
Please be
Tom?
ready to jump in. File IHBHE, Reading Public Schools.
I move to
Remote
suspend
learning.
the reading.
Thank
Second,
you.
seconded. Okay. So is there any questions on this, comments? Tom?
So this is where I come back to my other pedantic one. I don't have a lot from a content perspective on this one. This one, though, does have a parent policy that we do not have in our policy manual. The parent policy of this one is IHBH, and it's titled Alternative Schooling, which we don't have in our policy manual. So I think we need to include that one and review that one before we can accept this one, because it's directly associated to alternative schooling. Alternative school programs is what IHBH is in the reference manual.
John, did you have anything on that? John Doherty?
No, I'll have to look at the alternative schooling one. My guess is we've never had that. Well, I know we haven't had it since I've been here.
No, we haven't. So we either make this our alternative schooling one, or we accept or process the alternative schooling one and make this one a child of that one.
Yeah, I can pull that one for the next meeting.
So if we were to do the former of what you just suggested, Tom, this would not be called remote learning. It would be called alternative schooling.
Or we can, I mean, we don't have to follow mass 100%, right? We just have to think about the lettering. So we can make this our IHBH and call it remote learning if we don't want to do alternative schools. And I can read that right now if anybody wants to understand what that says. It's a little bit more broad reaching than what our remote learning is. And so I would not say that we necessarily want to just accept it as it is. But, you know, if anybody wants, I'll just do it real quick so people can understand what it says. But it says, some children have great difficulty coping with conventional school program and as a result will drop out of school. Some children require more support and direct supervision than is reasonably available in conventional school settings. And some children, along with highly structured academic experience, require special focus on life skills and an appropriate vocational involvement. The school committee will provide alternative education programs where these needs have been identified, where establishment of such programs is feasible, and where the programs provide fall within the function normally associated with the public school district. These alternative educational programs will seek to provide an appropriate academic, social, and vocational experience to aid these young people either to re-enter the regular school district, move into another educational setting, or prepare them for successful employment. And Mass created this in 2016. So one could argue this remote learning doesn't really belong under that, and we can create our own lettering appropriately.
Yeah, so I don't think it does, because I think a lot of the things you just read or referenced in that policy, we are doing in other policies now, probably mostly in the special education policies. So that's just my thought on it.
I would agree. A lot of that does read to me as a special education related policy in many cases. So one quick adjustment here would be just to make this IHBH and acknowledge that we're going to divert ourselves here from MASC's reference policy manual. We don't need to have an alternative school programs policy necessarily unless everybody thinks we do, and we can adjust from there.
Sean, did you have something?
Yeah, let me just say, I agree with Tom. I think it's probably preferable to adopt this under a different lettering construct if that's possible. Just pointing out the obvious here, but if we were to adopt the parent policy, it means we need 2 more meetings before we can adopt this one. So, yeah. You know, which is fine. It still theoretically gets us before September 15th, but I'm just throwing that out there. The other thing that I had was substantive, I hope, which is under in developing a remote learning plan, the superintendent will, and then there are 8 or 9 bullets. Does it make sense for us to include a bullet that says something along the lines of develop standards and expectations to ensure reasonable consistency between schools? Is the language that I drafted. And recognizing that we've already done that in our remote learning plan for September, this is a policy that's going to live long past when we're in this COVID crisis, and we're going to be using remote learning potentially as a backstop for snow days and things like that. So I think it would be helpful for us to include something explicit that we want, current and future, and our superintendent in 100 years to all sort of strive to create some standards that ensure that parents can expect consistency among and between schools.
Sean, can you say that again?
Yeah, the language, the quick draft that I've written here was develop standards and expectations to ensure reasonable consistency between schools. It probably could use another word or two to clarify what consistency means and consistency of what, but that was what I said.
Okay.
Is that it, Sean?
That's it.
Tom?
I was just going to say, I second that addition. I like that addition, and yeah, consistency at appropriate levels. Maybe the only thing to add would be elementary consistency, middle school consistency, high school consistency, or something else along those lines to clarify consistency a little bit and of expectations of academic delivery, something along those lines. But I wholeheartedly agree with that addition.
Okay. John Parks?
Yeah, I'm just actually wondering, Chuck, if that could go under identifying goals and strategies for maintaining standards.
Under that policy, you mean?
No, under that bullet point. But it actually would be better on its own.
So John, I did think about where which of the two areas it would best live in, and the reason that I opted to suggest it comes in the second sort of set of bullets is the second one says the superintendent will. The first one says may include, and it's just a little bit softer. That was the rationale for why I sort of called it out as a standalone bullet in the second block there.
You get.
And again, I sorry, go ahead, Chuck.
No, I was just going to say, John, did you have, John Parks, did you understand that rationale?
Yeah,
or?
Yep.
Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know we're sort of voting this policy and reading this policy in the context of our plans for the fall. But I think that what that bullet is intended to do is reflected already in our plans for the fall. This again is just about sort of looking forward to how this policy gets applied when we're in a different situation.
We wanted to be a legacy type policy.
Right.
Anybody else? Tom?
So to that end, I wonder if the beginning of the second paragraph is appropriately forward-looking. And Dr. Doherty, I would very much appreciate your feedback on this. I don't have wording necessarily yet, but when it says, when it becomes necessary for the school district to provide support, then the superintendent shall establish a plan. And I think that's too late. I think we learned that the hard way. I think we almost need to think of this as we would in the business case, a constantly updated disaster recovery type plan, where we keep a plan active, where we fund the tool set that's necessary for it, and where we're able to execute it in a relatively short order. And for that matter, going forward, the heat and winter or cold or snow out days can fit into this plan on a go forward basis. But we have something that's consistent, it's living, it's a regular plan that's reviewed. And so maybe we can just adjust the language here from the base mass policy to being more of a proactive policy instead of a reactive policy.
So that paragraph would start with the school district will maintain a plan to provide support, something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, we can wordsmith that whole sentence really. The superintendent, shall maintain, a plan and procedures to ensure in the case of, emergency closure or things like that. So it's a positive thing we're doing on a regular basis. It's a regular expectation so that we're ready when the next thing happens. Not when, not if, but when, right? And we as a committee as well, when we put the policy in place, we have to think about that means we have to make sure as much as possible the funding's there to support that too, right? We can't ask it to be done and then not support it from a financial perspective. But I think that supports us going forward from an excellence perspective, both from an execution, from a training for the teachers, whatever else is necessary. I think all those things come into play here as we work through this.
So just to insert a little levity here, does this mean kids will never have snow days anymore?
Yes.
That's the plan, right, for this year.
I'm fine with that.
John, did you have your hand raised?
I did. Just to add on to Tom's, I'd really like to have that include training because I think that's absolutely key to make sure the staff is currently trained and that training is maintained on all technologies and tools that they're going to use moving forward.
Just to sort of be clear here, if we're implementing a policy that says the superintendent has to do all this stuff, which has kind of a long-term focus, to what degree is the superintendent on the hook for doing that right now, where we're doing it for the particular use case, right? So I like the idea of this being sort of a legacy policy and that kind of thing versus, again, just being reactive to the moment. But I also want to sort of say out loud that I don't think we have an expectation that, you know, in the next month, we're going to also know what our sort of long-term non-COVID time remote plan would look like, right? So I just want to say that out loud.
Tom?
I would agree with that out loud statement, although I think, you know, the team has done a great job preparing for that COVID time. I think maybe something in here on an annual or biannual basis, where in that case, biannual is every 2 years or something along those lines, not every 6 months. There's a review that happens of that policy or of that plan. So we put some expectation that this is not a one-time thing, but we will come back and look at it, you know, maybe it's every 18 months, maybe it's every 12 months, maybe it's every 24 months, but some sort of cycle or review, so that, you know, thinking of scheduling as well, because it probably needs to come before us. Are you still comfortable with this and things like that? So if we're going to do this, we're putting in place, Sean, to your point, the belts and suspenders, but also making sure we're not saying this has to be done tomorrow, right? But the process is in place.
John Parks?
Yeah, couldn't this just be added to our upcoming district improvement plan? So that, yes, we have our COVID plan now. Let's look at our 3-year plan and add this in so that we have expectations on how this is going to roll out and it's built into that district improvement plan.
Good point. John, did you have something? John Doherty?
No, I was nodding because I had already written that down. I was going to include that in the next draft.
Any other comments?
I like
Okay.
it.
So we'll vote, John Parks,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Carla,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
and Chuck, aye. Okay, thank you. Okay, that, excuse me, I'm dropping all my papers here. That concludes our open session content of this meeting. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to bring up publicly before we enter into executive session?
I don't see any public comment messages. If anybody else does, I do not.
Chuck, I want to just add one more thing in relation to the statement I read earlier tonight. Once we have a little bit more information next week, I will hold some forums so that I can explain to people what's going on.
Thank you for adding that.
Because I'm getting some emails, so I just wanted to let the public know that I'll set some things up like I did a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I've been getting some texts, so there will be questions.
Yeah.
John, did you have a question, or is that from before? I'm sorry. John Parks?
That was from before.
Chuck, can I-
Ryan? Yes, Carl.
Dr. Doherty, have we let the students know, the high-risk students and the students know who will be in full-time? Do they already know that they're full-time, or have they not been informed yet?
Actually, I'll defer to Jen on that because I know there's been some guidance that we just got some guidance from Desi, I think today.
There she is.
Yes, hi. Thank you. We actually just got guidance from DESE today. We will be reaching out to every family individually and working with them to determine what special education services will look like for their student. So all of the services in the IEP need to be delivered, but they may be delivered differently depending on the needs of the family and the student. So again, I think our overarching has been program students will receive more of that full-time instruction, but we will now be reaching out, and then DESE has provided us a template to then follow up in writing to all of the parents. So team chairs will be starting that work with the principals and Allison and I next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Doherty, can I jump into another question that just came to mind about when we did the walkthroughs, we were able to see classrooms at all three levels, right, at the high school, middle schools, and elementary. We didn't get to see a RISE classroom setup. Can you talk to that at all, of how that classroom is going to look? And I've been thinking lately, how does this work for the littlest of our children, right? And how, you know, in terms of what does their day look like? Are they going to have the tools, the toys that they typically have in their classrooms?
Sure. Jen, do you want to answer that too, since we were on that tour?
Sure, I can start, and then I know Chris and Gail were there as well, so they can feel free to jump in. We've actually been working very closely with Kelly Boswick and the staff. We just, Allison, Chris, and I met with them, I don't even remember, yesterday maybe.
Yes.
It's all a blur. To really talk about what the classrooms will look like, how many tables we need in each room, what toys the students can have in there that need to be separated for each student, and what can be shared, and what cleaning will need to take place. We are looking at some very creative protocols in terms of drop off and pickup, and also at using some spaces very flexibly, so that we don't need to have the kids walking through the high school to use the gym. They can use places right in RISE. And so it will look different, but we are confident, especially after some of our summer school experiences, that we can still give the students what they need. And Kelly will be doing a lot of outreach to those families, because part of the state's guidance was not only students with significant special needs, but preschool students as well. So we're trying to figure out, how do we get them in and service them and really support them through this.
Great, thank you. Because I feel like their first exposure to school, we want it to be a good and appropriate one.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Jen. Anything else? Okay, I will entertain a motion. You're on mute.
Bingo.
Every one of you at one time. So thank you. I moved to enter into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining and not to return to open session.
Second.
Seconded by John Parks. This roll call. John?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Carla?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
And Chuck? Aye. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you over there.
Thank you.